Hey, it's Luke from LT Gaming, and today we're taking a look at Star Wars Zero Company in our Should You Buy series. This is where we spend some serious time with the game, work out what it does well, where it falls short, and hopefully give you a pretty good indication of whether it's actually worth your money. We've now put a frankly unhealthy amount of time into Zero Company between the two of us, and with the game releasing on August 27th, it's finally time to talk about the whole experience. And just to be completely clear before we start, this video is not sponsored. Now, before we get half of Zero Company's shot because I decided 70% was definitely good enough odds, you can use the force on that like button. It helps the channel out massively and me and Tom really appreciate it. At its heart, Star Wars Zero Company is a single-player turn-based tactical strategy game. It's developed by Bit Reactor in collaboration with Lucasfilm Games and published by EA. You play as Hawks, a former Republic officer who now commands this rather unconventional collection of soldiers, mercenaries, droids and other assorted Star Wars misfits during the twilight of the Clone Wars. And yes, of course, the obvious comparison is XCOM, because you control a small squad from an isometric perspective. Move between cover, take percentage-based shots, use Overwatch and gradually develop your characters into increasingly ridiculous killing machines. But Zero Company very quickly starts building its own systems around that formula. Every operator you control has 3 action points to work with, attacks build a shared resource called Advantage, and this can unleash some of your strongest abilities. And then all of the different character classes give you very different ways of approaching the same battlefield. This is really welcome, that variety really gives this game staying power. But the battles in Zero Company really are only half the game here. The campaign progresses through cycles, and between missions you're back at the Den, which basically acts as Zero Company's home. This is where you'll be recruiting operators, healing injuries, modifying equipment, upgrading the base and deciding what you're actually going to do next. Then you approach the holotable where you've got full tactical missions alongside smaller operations. And these can reward you with things like resources and influence across the different zones. The important bit is that time actually moves forward when you complete missions. This means that opportunities can disappear, story missions eventually become unavoidable, and you simply can't do everything in one campaign. Add investigations and the occasional third-person story sequence into that structure, and Zero Company ends up feeling much more like an actual campaign than just a procession of tactical maps. You really are building this little company over time, and by the end it really does feel like your Zero Company, and I think that's important for immersion and bringing you back to this game time and time again. Let's start with the biggest positive, because the combat is absolutely fantastic. This is probably the most fun I've had with turn-based tactical combat since XCOM 2, and there are moments where I think Zero Company actually surpasses it simply because Star Wars gives the developers so many ridiculous toys to play with. Once characters like the Jedi and bounty hunters start opening up, battles become an absolute playground. You've got blaster fire everywhere, force abilities throwing people around, rockets smashing through positions, and characters combining their attacks in ways that can completely change a turn. The AI in this game surprised me as well. For example, I had one enemy throw a grenade to force one of my characters out of position and then immediately set up Overwatch because it knew I was probably going to have to move. As a result, my entire turn became about using somebody else to break that Overwatch safely before I could rescue the original character. Those are the situations I want from a tactical game. Not simply figuring out who has the highest chance to hit, but solving these little combat situations. The missions themselves also have plenty of scripted surprises. One battle might suddenly have a Vulture droid bombarding sections of the battlefield, while another forces you to rethink your position halfway through. And then you get something like Anakin Skywalker turning up and actually being usable in combat. And the Star Wars fan inside me basically goes nuts, especially as I've been reading so many Anakin-focused Clone Wars novels lately, expanded universe and a little bit of canon. He's ridiculously powerful, his abilities feel ridiculously awesome, and that's exactly how Anakin should feel. Just a quick interlude to say subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100k and we really need you to get there. We are a proper PC gaming channel. You're going to find all the best games here, including space, war games, RTS and everything you can think of. We even do some amazing mod spotlights. So if you have amazing taste in games, hit the subscribe button. Both me and Tom really appreciate you. What really pushes the game beyond the initial Star Wars novelty though is just how much control you have over your squad. Customization, like I discussed in the preview, is easily one of of Zero Company's standout features. Even Hawks isn't some completely fixed protagonist, you can customize him, but you're able to change the appearance of your operatives, their species, clothing, and combat specialization, and then you can build custom operators around whatever version of Zero Company you want to create. I even used the character databank to create Thrawn, stuck him into my recruitment pool, and eventually had my own slightly questionable version of him running around as an operator. And the attention to detail here is brilliant. Put certain helmets or face coverings onto your characters and their actual voices become muffled or modulated. I mean, it's completely unnecessary, but that's exactly the kind of little detail that makes you realize somebody making this game really cared about Star Wars. More importantly though, customization feeds directly into replayability. I already want to do a heavily clone-focused campaign, I want a droid company, and I want to experiment with completely different class combinations. There are 8 standard specializations, and characters can eventually develop beyond that initial role through the wider progression system. It basically makes you think every time you go into a mission, what combination can I use here and who will be fun to play with? It means massive replayability, guys. And that's where bonds become surprisingly important to the game. Characters who fight together gradually develop their relationships, and improving these bonds eventually gives you cross-training bonuses. So you're not just leveling 6 isolated characters, you're developing relationships between the people inside your company. It encouraged me to keep experimenting because suddenly putting 2 characters together wasn't only about whether their weapons complemented each other, but what bonuses I could eventually unlock by strengthening their partnership. The Den really helps to sell this as well. Characters physically hang around the base, they speak to each other, and they'll even comment on what's happening in different combinations, which really brings you into the game. I genuinely enjoyed finishing a difficult mission and then just walking around the Den for a while, checking on people and sorting the company out before heading back into combat. The main campaign has plenty to do, but there are also loads of optional missions and operations sitting around it. And because you can't necessarily complete everything before time moves forward, there is already an obvious reason to come back through the game and make different choices. Personally, I had a great time playing on normal, while Tom went in on hard and extreme and actually started failing missions. So don't mistake the approachable presentation for a lack of challenge either. If you want Zero Company to start murdering the people you spent hours carefully creating, it's quite happy to oblige in that regard. And then there's simply the presentation of the whole thing. Zero Company looks like a genuine generational step forward for this type of tactical game. Characters look excellent, attacks have real impact, environments get smashed apart, and then you'll find the camera dropping down into the more cinematic angles when something particularly Star Wars is happening. Ooh, I love a lightsaber up close, it looks so bloody good. The action and investigation sequences around some of the main missions are fairly basic mechanically, but I actually like having them there because they break up the tactical battles and make the whole campaign feel more like an adventure. The story itself is fairly serviceable rather than something I think is going to redefine Star Wars, to be honest. It serves as a decent backdrop to allow this game to actually exist, so I'm gonna go with it. Performance on my main PC, which has a 4070 Ti, was also solid overall, and there's a good selection of settings available if you need to tweak things. Frame generation really did boost the performance here, and when I did this there wasn't that noticeable a drop in quality. I also played with a controller at times and it works surprisingly well. It's pretty cool for how much tactical information on screen, and it feels very natural to use, so don't be put off if you want to use a controller here. And perhaps the strongest endorsement I can give the whole thing is that Tom isn't even particularly into Star Wars, and he's now completely addicted to this game. It just shows it's a genuinely excellent tactical game that also happens to make extremely good use of Star Wars. There are, however, definitely a few things worth talking about on the negative side. The story is firmly part of the newer Disney era canon, and you're going to have to decide how much that matters to you personally. Zero Company takes a fairly gritty, grounded military approach to the Clone Wars, rather than going completely wild in the way some of the old expanded universe material sometimes did. I actually thought that worked pretty well for what the game was trying to do, although Tom was more critical of some of the repeated Republic versus Separatist sentiment around the Den. He felt sometimes it didn't make sense with the overall goal of Zero Company, though I get you do have different characters from different sides in your mercenary outfit and they have to express their views. But Tom felt some of this writing was a little forced. The Infinite Coil are also a little uneven as villains. They do have some interesting ideas, including earworms taking control of people, at which point I was basically asking whether we wandered into Wrath of Khan 2. But after a while I found myself wanting a little more variety in who I was actually fighting. Battle droids, to be honest, were easily my favourite enemies, while the Coil can start to feel a little more generic generic once you fought different versions of them across a number of missions. I'll be honest, by the end I was already dreaming about what a sequel could do with stormtroopers, Imperial forces, and completely different eras of Star Wars. There are also some technical annoyances. The cinematic camera looks great when it works, but every now and again it completely loses its mind. You'll perform the big dramatic attack, the camera swings around for the action shot, and you end up getting completely stuck behind a wall. Tom also ran into some strange Overwatch behaviour involving elevation, so there are definitely still a few bugs to iron out. More importantly, for a turn-based tactics title, this is a very demanding game. It did make my system work, and Tom has an even better PC than me, and he said at times it was making his really go for it. So make sure to check the minimum specifications before you buy. And unfortunately, my Steam Deck experiment was basically a disaster. In the build I played, I was basically averaging somewhere around 25 frames per second, and the overall experience simply wasn't good enough for me to recommend playing it this way. Patches may obviously change that situation after release, but based on the version I actually played, do not buy Zero Company expecting this to be your next great Steam Deck tactics game. So, should you buy Star Wars Zero Company? Yes, you absolutely should. The force is strong with this one. And I really don't say that lightly, because I've played enough disappointing Star Wars games over the years to be extremely cautious. But Zero Company is for me one of the best games of 2026 so far. And I'd already put it in the conversation around some of the better Star Wars games we've ever had. It takes a style of game I've loved since XCOM, modernizes the presentation, gives you an enormous amount of freedom over your company, and then uses the Star Wars license to enhance the mechanics rather than simply sell them. The lightsabers and clone troopers get you through the door, but it's the squad building, tactical decisions, customization, and the constant desire to try one more mission that kept me playing. And perhaps the funniest thing about Zero Company is that after years of wondering what Star Wars gaming needs to do to really recapture some of the old magic, it might have taken a turn-based tactical strategy game to do it. There are bugs, the enemy roster could be broader, and I don't think everyone will love every part of the new canon story, but none of these things come remotely close to outweighing how much fun I've had and also how much fun Tom's had with this game. I'm already thinking about my next campaign, the different operators I want to create, and what happens if I build an entire squad around one ridiculous idea. The possibilities for expansions are huge, the possibilities for sequels across different Star Wars eras is even bigger, and if Bit Reactor gives the opportunity to build on what they've created here, this could become an incredible strategy series. Star Wars Zero Company is simply one of the best games I've played in a long time, and right now it's a very strong Game of the Year contender for us at LT Gaming. I've been Luke, and may the Force be with you.